If someone had told me a year ago that the only way to feel alive was to commit an act that could ruin my perfect life and cost me everything, I wouldn't have believed it. I was the impeccable wife living in the golden cage of the American dream, but one evening, I did something that permanently divided my life into before and after. This is the story of a betrayal that became my only salvation. And I don't regret it. You won't believe how I brought myself to do it. But before I begin, I am very curious to know, where are you listening to me from tonight? Which city? Which quiet corner of the world, where only a whisper can be heard, or perhaps from a metropolis that never sleeps? Write it in the comments so I can imagine you while I tell my story. It matters to me to know where my words find their home. My name is Evelyn Ross. I am 47, but sometimes I feel that my soul froze somewhere in my 20s, at the moment I made the fateful, yet logical and flawless choice to marry Robert. We live in Beverly Heights, the most exclusive suburb of Chicago, in a mansion that is not merely a home, but a living, breathing, yet actually dead testament to success. Here, every square inch of lawn, every line of the landscaping, every antique detail of the interior screams status and impeccable taste. Our house is a perfect, glossy model you might see on the cover of an architectural magazine, but one that lacks a single, truly alive, careless trace of a human life. Robert, my husband, Vice President of Business Development at a giant tech corporation. He is the embodiment of the American dream of the big data era, impeccably dressed, always focused, his words always weighty and devoid of emotional fluff. For 23 years, he provided me with everything a woman could wish for: 2 children who are now successfully attending Ivy League universities, an annual membership at the most exclusive golf club, yearly trips to Europe and Hawaii. But he long ago stopped seeing me. To him, I had become the most expensive, most reliable, most perfectly functioning asset in his flawless portfolio. I was his impeccable wife who ran the Suburban Living magazine, a publication that looked more like a catalog for the wealthy than art, organized charity dinners for the opera, and always knew which variety of Merlot to choose for his boss. The most terrifying thing for me was the realization of my own invisibility. Robert wasn't cruel. He was functional. He didn't insult me. He simply ignored my personality. I could change my wardrobe, read a book that turned my world upside down, or start a new project. He would look at me, nod, and say, "You look great, Evelyn, as always. You're a dependable home front." Home front service. That's what I had become. Our conversations about feelings, fears, or dreams ceased years ago. If I tried to initiate such a topic, he would gently but firmly redirect the discussion to logistics, schedules, accounts, investments. The silence that reigned in our house was not peace. It was an absolute vacuum in which all living emotions died. I felt my soul, once bright and full of creative fire, shrink, harden, and turn into the very cold, expensive marble statue he valued so highly in our hall. My only secret escape was a tiny patch of land in the backyard, behind an old, dilapidated shed that Robert kept promising to tear down. I cultivated my wild garden. It was my resistance to his perfectionism. Instead of a lawnmower manicured grass, there was a lush, chaotic growth of shrubs, herbs that scattered their seeds, and wild roses that bloomed when they chose, not according to a schedule. It was a place where I could be dirty, where I could smell the earth and touch imperfect things. I called it Evelyn's escape in my mind. I often sat there on an old, wooden bench that I had painted myself in a provocatively bright, nonconforming color. It was on that bench, to the sound of cicadas and the distant hum of the freeway, that I spent the most agonizing hours of my crisis. I was physically ill from the absence of life. I remember one evening when Robert was away at another corporate dinner, and I was alone. I stood by the window and looked at my reflection, which was like an advertisement, flawless, elegant, expensive. But inside, I was screaming. I wanted to take a brick and smash that perfect glass. I wanted Robert to return and see not the impeccable hostess, but a woman bleeding from boredom and invisibility. But I knew he would only see a breach of order and property damage. I started my quiet, internal revolt. I began writing in an old, locked laptop. Not articles for the magazine, but manifestos. About how architecture should be alive. About how important it is for space to serve the person, not the status. About how the fear of imperfection kills the soul. These notes were my only, small, personal truth. I realized I wasn't looking for a new husband or a lover. I was looking for a witness. I was looking for someone who would see me, not the role. I was looking for fire to burn down this golden cage. And I knew that fire might destroy everything, including me. But I saw no other path to salvation. My soul demanded air, and I was ready to commit the most terrible, most unthinkable social crime in our circle: betrayal. My escape plan was not thoroughly thought out. It began with renting a small, rundown studio in downtown, in the district Robert avoided like the plague. It was the oldest part of the city, with peeling brick walls, the smell of stale coffee, fresh paint, and, most importantly, unvarnished life. I lied to Robert, saying I had joined the Historical Preservation Committee, which required absolute secrecy and daily trips into the city. Robert didn't even ask questions, just nodded and said, "Excellent, Evelyn. Use it to build connections with the mayor. That could be useful for my future projects." His reaction confirmed that he only saw function and gain. The studio was on the 3rd floor, overlooking a narrow, dirty alley, but it had sunlight. Sunlight that fell onto the wooden floor, stained with paint and turpentine. There, I finally began to paint. Not still lives for the house, but the chaos raging inside me. Bright, uncontrolled bursts of color that symbolized the destruction of my perfect world.
Mark.
I met him right there. He was 35, an architect restorer who fought to preserve every old brick in that neighborhood, while Robert fought for demolition and the construction of soulless, shiny glass boxes. Mark was the complete opposite of Robert. His hands were calloused and smudged with cement, his clothes simple but clean. He was real, not polished by the corporate world. Our acquaintance was accidental. He, along with his workers, confused the doors and burst into my studio. He saw my canvases, which I was frantically trying to hide. "Those aren't just canvases," he said, his voice low but penetrating, as if speaking to my soul. "It's a confession. You're painting the walls you're trying to tear down, and you're afraid someone will see how strong you are." I felt my years-long armor crumble. He, a stranger, in 30 seconds saw what Robert hadn't seen in 20 years. He saw my strength, not my role. From that day, our connection became dense, secret, and based on words. We talked about architecture, the city, people, and how important attention to detail is. Mark would say, "A good building shouldn't scream about itself. It should whisper about the person." And I understood that my marriage was a building that screamed about money, but didn't whisper about me. I shared with him my old blueprints, my dreams of creating social spaces that would serve as comfort, not function. He didn't laugh, didn't judge. He simply said, "That's honest, Evelyn. That's your truth." This emotional infidelity became my air. I lived from meeting to meeting. My days were divided into before Mark, where I was the impeccable function, and after, where I was a living woman. I started dressing differently. Not in those custom-made, restrictive outfits, but in soft, comfortable dresses that allowed me to breathe and didn't fear the smell of paint. I began to analyze why his attention was so crucial. Robert gave me provision. Mark gave me recognition. Robert gave me status. Mark gave me value. Robert loved me as property. Mark saw me as a person. This was the deepest, most destructive form of betrayal. I was giving my soul to another man without touching him. My conscience, of course, tormented me. Every morning, putting on the diamond necklace Robert gave me for our anniversary, I felt like the most terrible liar in the world. But as soon as I remembered Mark's gaze, his words about truth and chaos, the guilt receded. I was on the path to salvation, and that path, I realized, could not be clean and flawless. I was ready for my emotional escape to soon turn into a physical act. And that didn't frighten me as much as the thought of returning to that dead, impeccable silence. Mark became my mirror. in which I saw, for the first time in years, not Robert's reflection, but my own, exhausted but alive face. And I knew what I had to do to keep that living woman from disappearing again. The week before the inevitable felt endless. Robert left for an important symposium in Singapore. As always, he left me a detailed, 4-page instruction on how to function in his absence, a schedule of calls, a list of suppliers to contact, and even the orchid watering schedule. He didn't call or text to ask how I was doing. He called to ask how his investor negotiations went and if I had forgotten about his dry cleaning. His control was pervasive and absolute. And it was this absolute indifference to my person that gave me the final moral right to act. That night, I didn't go to the studio right away. I spent a few hours in our house. I walked through all the rooms, like a ghost through my own tomb. Cold, polished marble, the impeccable kitchen I hardly used, the bedroom that looked more like a 5-star hotel suite than a place for intimacy. I looked at photos of Robert, always smiling, always successful, and realized that I didn't hate him. I simply outgrew him. Our marriage died not because of a fight, but because of distancing. I couldn't pretend anymore. I drove to the studio. I didn't call Mark. I just knew he would be there, working on his blueprints late into the night. When I climbed the old, creaky stairs and opened the door, he was sitting at the table, surrounded by plans. He looked up, and in his eyes, there was no surprise or question. Only understanding. "Robert is gone," I said, my voice almost a whisper. "I know," he replied. "You look like you just climbed out of the water." "I did, Mark. And I don't need air anymore. I need a foundation." I walked up to him. It was the longest, most important walk of my life. I wasn't going to seduce. I was going to confess my life. "I can't live a lie," I said, looking at his graphite-stained hands. "I can't go back to what was. I can't be a function anymore. I'm not asking you to be my salvation, Mark. I'm asking you to be truth." He stood up. He didn't speak of passion. He spoke of honor. "I won't be your lover, Evelyn. I will be the man who sees you. You chose destruction. And I will be here." After that, everything was not about passion or forbidden desire. It was an act of attention. When he finally touched me, I felt not burning desire, but comfort. His hands were rough but gentle. They didn't demand, they accepted. I wept not from grief, but from liberation. I wept for myself, for my lost youth, for the 20 years I spent building someone else's facade. The physical betrayal was not the end, but the symbol of my inner, long-completed divorce. I finally found reality, and that reality was bitter, imperfect, but mine. Waking up the next morning in a small, paint-smelling studio, I felt drained but strong. I couldn't stay. His world was too honest, too poor, and I was too complex and jaded to simply fit into it. Mark was my medicine, but not my home. I knew I had to build my home myself. I had to go back and finalize the destruction. I left Mark a note. That was my truth. "Thank you for being my witness. I won't go back to him. And I won't come to you. I'm going to build my own." I got into my car. The drive back to Beverly Heights was not a road home, but a road to the scaffold of my former life. I was ready for the catastrophe because I knew I was finally alive. Robert returned with a sense of triumph. He walked into the house, carrying the aura of a successfully closed complex deal. He didn't even notice my absence the night before. This was the loudest confirmation of my conviction. He expected a perfect house, impeccable order, and me, as a function, ready to listen to his victory. He stood at the bar, pouring himself a whiskey, and began talking about the Singapore deal. I interrupted him, placing a small, modest, handwritten letter on the marble counter. "Robert, I'm filing for divorce. I'm leaving." His hand holding the glass trembled. It was the first time I had seen his control crack. "This isn't funny, Evelyn. I have a call in an hour. We have an excellent marriage. We have an excellent facade. I cheated on you. Physically. With a young architect from downtown, the one you called and profitable." The word "and profitable" triggered him. He didn't explode from jealousy, but from image damage. "You're destroying everything. our status, my deals, our children. Do you realize what you're doing? You'll be penniless, Evelyn. I'll make sure you don't get a dime more than legally required. You'll be judged in every club you joined. You chose filth over luxury. I chose life over luxury, Robert. I chose truth over your facade. You only ask about reputation, not about my pain. You didn't love me. You loved the idea of an impeccable wife. And I won't be your idea anymore. A long, agonizing divorce process began. Robert was stingy, cruel, using every legal trick to strip me of everything. I didn't fight for money. I fought for freedom. I gave him everything that was part of his brand, the mansion, the cars, all the accounts. I took only the essentials, my paintings, my blue bench from the garden, and my old laptop with my manifestos. I moved into a small, noisy, but bright studio apartment downtown. My new life was the exact opposite of my old one. I had to wash dishes myself, shop for groceries, and count every dollar. But for the first time, I felt that I was managing my life, not my function. I found a job, teaching painting classes at a local community center and consulting with Mark on aesthetics for his restoration projects. I did not become Mark's partner romantically. Our connection remained an emotional anchor. We became friends, partners in art, understanding each other implicitly. Our betrayal was a one-time act of liberation that required no continuation. Most importantly was my children's reaction. They, raised in that flawless, cold luxury, saw my freedom. My daughter, who had always been quiet and obedient, told me, "Mom, you look 20 years younger. You're finally breathing. I'm proud of you." That recognition was worth more to me than all of Robert's diamonds. I started painting light. I painted not chaos, but windows, those low, wide windows that let in not just light, but hope. I found my calling. I became an architect of small forms, creating cozy, human spaces in old buildings. Not monuments, but niches for rest. I realized that my life was not destroyed, but rebuilt, on a new, honest foundation. I lost wealth, but I gained myself. Sometimes, when I sat on my blue bench, which I had moved into the studio, I remembered Robert. I didn't wish him ill. I just realized he remained in his impeccable but empty museum. And I walked out into life. And in this, finally found silence, filled with the smell of paint and the sounds of the city, I felt absolutely happy. My infidelity became not a shame, but an act of creation of my new, real life.